Welcome back. Well, most people have welcomed the arrival of the COVID-19 vaccines, but at the same time, the pandemic and the vaccine itself has been surrounded by conspiracy theories and misinformation. Can someone actually refuse a vaccine? What about essential services workers? What are the legalities about being vaccinated at work? We speak now to Mtho Maphumulo from Adams & Adams Attorneys to get a clearer understanding on this. Mtho, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time on The Pulse. The Constitution, if I recall correctly, says that you actually have control over your own body. If that is the case, can government or can an employer force you to get a vaccine?
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to your viewers, and thanks for having me. Well, you are quite right. The Constitution in Section 12 does specify that everyone has a right to have a control of their body and also their psychological integrity. However, it is important to remember that every right in the Constitution is subject to limitation in terms of Section 36 of the Constitution. That said, we also need to consider the fact that there are plethora of legislations where there may be the exceptions to that then allows the medical personnel to encroach to your right of provided under Section 12.
I mean, I suppose it may depend on what sector you're in. If you're a healthcare worker and an employer also has a duty of care to you, in other words, they have to make sure that you're not placed in danger, they would say, well, the best way to protect you is to vaccinate.
That is so. Well, say there is a case on this now, on this topic relating to the refusal and the taking of vaccines. It will then be determined on each case. Well, so each case is going to be determined on each fact. So in one industry or one work environment, it may be reasonable for a worker to refuse taking certain medication. However, on the other industries, it may not be so. So it will be very much be bound upon the fact and the peculiar circumstances of each matter. So we cannot say there will be a blanket approach to such matter.
So I could imagine, to sort of just try and throw some examples into the mix, for a healthcare worker, it could be mandatory. Your employer could say you have to get a vaccine. For someone who's lucky enough to work at an office or in a studio, you might not be able to be forced to get a vaccine. But some of the problems might be, or some of the disputes might be, some of the cases that are sort of in the middle. So an example would be a factory where 300 people work in that factory, or perhaps a fast food outlet where people are dealing face to face with customers. I could see the disputes emerging in those spaces.
No, for sure. So where there may be a risk to public, so those would your frontline workers, and where there is a greater chance of a contact between the working personnel in that particular space. It becomes quite difficult to refuse taking a medication, because there are laws that permit the limitation of the right to bodily integrity. In this particular instance, we can look at the National Health Act, particularly Section 7, and then there will also be internal kind of policies each, regulating specific industries, and where there may be a risk to public health. It is highly unlikely that one may succeed in refusing taking the vaccine.
Mtho, I mean, one of the issues that I think runs through our employment law, and I'm an employee, but I'm not a lawyer, is the issue of consultation. Would an employer have to consult before making something like this mandatory?
It is advisable. Otherwise, you may find yourself in hot water for contravening certain regulations, certain laws. And that is the last thing you want, having to litigate over matters which could be avoided by simply consulting with the lawyer. So you need, as an employer, to take the necessary steps to inquire regarding the legalities concomitant to the taking and the refusal of the medical treatment and also the vaccine.
This would be, so someone would have a job now, their boss would say to them, or might say to them, look, I really want you to get a vaccine. And the worker might turn around and say, well, I don't want to pay for it, and you're not offering to pay for it. Now, what happens there? I mean, I know, for example, often people will say, before we will employ you, you have to get a driver's license. And, the employee pays for the driver's license, not the employer. Is that the precedent, or is this different because the situation is changed once you're already employed?
Well, in that particular example, we may have to look at the circumstances. We may have to look at the necessity for the vaccine or to be vaccinated. And also we look at the affordability on the part of the employee. So the question could then be, can the employee be expected, knowing their financial status or their, whether they can afford realistically to vaccinate? Then we have to look into that test. So it will go about the necessity and the affordability, and each case will then be different and turn around those two critical questions.
Mtho Maphumulo, I do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed. An attorney at Adams & Adams. It's a complex area. There's bound to be a court case coming your way on this.